Hello, today we're going to be heading out to shoot some seascape photography with this, the Nisi 9mm f2.8 lens, which is specifically designed for APS-C cameras. Now this is available on Sony E mount, Canon RF mount, Nikon Z mount, Fuji X mount and Micro Four Thirds cameras. And like I mentioned, it's specifically designed for APS-C cameras, so if you're using a full frame camera, you would likely see a fair amount of vignetting. So big thanks to Nisi for sending this lens out to me to test and use on the channel. So hopefully this is going to get some great results down at the coast, and it's maybe a lens I'll be able to use going forward for my wide angle seascape photography. So before we head to the coast, let's talk about the build quality of this lens. And I have to say, it's made really well. It looks fantastic as well. The base here, around the bayonet, we've got this wonderful yellow seal, which seals the lens against the camera body, meaning you won't get any water ingress into your sensor, which is great, especially when you're shooting seascapes and you've got all the elements and the sea spray coming at you. So that's particularly good. It's an all manual lens, so no electronic connections here. So none of your EXIF data from your lens is going to end up embedded into your file. So you won't know what aperture you've used when you've taken the image, when you review it in Lightroom, for example. So you have to remember your settings if that's important to you. I think the focus ring is buttery smooth, as is the clickless aperture ring as well. So photographers may not like the clickless aperture ring as much as perhaps videographers. So, you know, it's a bit of a double-edged sword, that one, but it does feel particularly nice. Got a metal lens hood as well, which is nice. The best thing to do when you're testing a lens is to get out there in the elements and test it. Now we've got a hurricane sitting in the Atlantic, in the mid-Atlantic at the minute, and that's throwing up some pretty tasty weather our way at the minute. We've had torrential rain and wind. Hopefully there's going to be a break in the clouds this evening, so I'm really hoping we can capture something dramatic down at the coast, something super wide, focusing in on our foreground and seeing what the elements throw at us. So yeah, can't wait to get down there and test it out. Then we'll be coming back and doing some comparisons with the Fuji 10-24. This is currently my wide angle lens of choice. Obviously this only goes down to 10mm, where this is 9mm, but we're going to be doing some side-by-side comparisons just to see how this compares to this in terms of image quality, detail, vignetting, and all that type of thing. Anyway, let's get straight down to the coast now and see if we can capture a couple of images this evening. So while I'm making my way to the coast, here's the specifications for this lens. If you're interested, just pause the video and take a look. Oh, it's brutal down here, guys. Something's telling me we're going to get a proper soak-in this evening. Conditions I think are probably quite changeable. Oh, it's not looking good though. Whew. High seas, extremely strong winds, gusting at about 40 miles an hour. And this rain's coming in now too. But we are going to try and get a composition this evening, looking back at the beach here. Hopefully we'll get a break in the clouds, otherwise it might be a black and white shot. Woohoo! Oh dear. I've had to retreat behind these rocks here just for a second because the wind and the rain is coming sideways and making things very, very challenging indeed. So I'm hoping that this rainstorm is going to pass quite quickly and we can get set up. I've got about 20 minutes now until sunset, so I really could do with this lot passing so I can get set up. I just need a break in this weather to be able to make an image. So fingers crossed it's going to happen, guys, but right now it's not looking good. Well, I've got my composition set up. These conditions are very, very challenging, but really dramatic, moody shot we've got here. I'm about, I'd say, 0.6 meters away from my foreground subject, so nice and close, focusing to infinity at f11. Everything's nice and sharp and in focus, looking good. Got these sweeping diagonals coming down from the cliff tops. some wonderful stones stretching out into the mid-ground, and I'm just waiting for the tide to come in and wash over my foreground. At the minute I'm a third of a second, so yeah, I'm hoping to capture a little bit of movement in the water, but not too much, and really focus on these dramatic moody skies and big seas. Looks pretty cool, just waiting for that right moment. I really need this sea to wash over right where my tripod is to get the most out of this image, I think. But I don't think that's going to be long before I have to move anyway. Here we go, here's a good one coming. Instagram looks good. Oh no, here comes the rain. But some wonderful skies right now. Even though it is getting dark, skies are so dramatic. So much water and sea spray coming at the equipment though. I'm going to have to get this gear back now and give it a really good clean down, because everything's got soaked. I'm completely soaked from pretty much the waist down. Boots are full of water, but it's been absolutely incredible. I just hope I've managed to capture a couple of images, because there's so much water coming at the lens, it's unreal. But anyway, I'll see you back at the office and we'll check out some of these images. Here we go, here comes another one. Oh yes, here we go. Lovely. Super challenging conditions down there, but thoroughly enjoyable. I got a good soaking too as I was heading back to the car, hence the wet hair. Anyway, I spent yesterday testing these two lenses against each other as a bit of a comparison, you know, just as a bit of a benchmark. Now obviously the Fuji's 10mm at its widest, and this is 9mm, so there's 1mm difference in the focal length. But this is right at the end of its zoom range, so you probably expect the prime lens to beat it in every aspect. So it'd be interesting to see how these fare against each other. But let's dive into Photoshop and we can look at an image here which is of my stone wall in my garden, shot in flat light at f11. I've got one with the 10-24 and one with the Nisi 9mm. So this is the Nisi 9mm and this one is the Fuji 10-24 at 10mm. And as you can see, the difference in the field of view there. But one thing we notice straight away is the Nisi 9mm deals with distortion a lot better than the 10-24. You can clearly see there's distortion there, whereas this one feels a lot more flatter across the image. And as we can see, sharpness and detail, I think the two lenses are fairly comparable. There's plenty of detail here in these stones and these little rockery type plants. But what we can clearly see is the Fuji 10-24 has a lot more contrast than the Nisi 9mm. In actual fact, to get the Nisi up to a similar amount of contrast, I'll just add a contrast layer, and I need to go up to around about somewhere around 25, 26 on the contrast slider in Photoshop to make the two images comparable. When we do that, the colours improve as well, the saturation in the colours improves as well. However, what I did find was that the Nisi 9mm has a slight magenta cast compared to the Fuji native lens. So that it's not huge, but as you can see here, if you look at this rock here in particular, you can certainly see a little bit more magenta than that of the Fuji lens. So let's take a little look up in the corners and see how they compare in the corners. They're very, very similar. There's not a huge difference in detail. I would say at f11, there's not a lot to tell between the two. We are heading back to the coast very, very shortly for a sunrise shoot. So I've got my fingers crossed something special is going to happen in the morning. We're going to take this lens out again, see if we can shoot directly at the sun, see if we can capture something cool, see what colours we can get, see how these images look at sunrise. And then we're going to come back and take a look at how this lens performs in terms of vignetting. There's some interesting findings there too. So join me in the morning for hopefully an epic sunrise. Don't you just love it when sunrise is at a respectable time? 7:20 here this morning. Now the beach I was going to shoot is somewhat covered by the high tide. There is a little pebble area down here which I'm hoping to get on. And the tide is receding. Unfortunately, there's a big bank of cloud out to the east, which potentially could block our chances of getting some decent colour this morning. However, the cloud's moving pretty quickly, and it changed for the better yesterday. So I'm hoping things will change for the good this morning too. So let's see if I can make a composition, set something up, and then yeah, we'll see how we get on. Well, true to form, we've got a bit of rain. I think sunrise is happening right now, but I can't see around the corner of this headland here. I can't get across far enough to the left to see where the sun is rising. However, we've got some great detail down here in the foreground. I love this cliff face on the right with the trees on the top. We've got some amazing cloud patterns forming out to sea. I don't think it's a lost cause this morning. I think it's an interesting composition. I'm just taking some exposures for the sky, and then I'm taking some for the foreground. So that'll just be blending those two images together because the dynamic range is too large to capture it within one image. Yesterday I shot all of my images at f11. I didn't really have to adjust my focus throughout that whole session, which was great because there was so much going on and I was dealing with the sea spray and the rain and the conditions. I didn't really need to worry about my focusing. So I shot everything at f11 and I knew everything was going to be nice and sharp. This morning I've got a bit more time, things are a bit more calm and tranquil, so I've adjusted my aperture to suit the scene. So today I'm shooting at f8, and that gives my foreground nice and sharp down here, using the shutter release. Currently I'm at 20th of a second exposing to the sky, but the foreground is going to be about 1/3 of a second because it's a lot darker down here, and that just gives us a little bit of movement in the water too. So once I've taken this image, when I've got the best of the cloud detail and everything, I'm going to experiment with using circular polarizer and a filter on the front of this lens, just to see how the lens handles the vignetting when the filters are on the front. And then in a bit we'll talk about how this lens handles vignetting as a whole at different aperture settings. Oh, that's an absolutely incredible shoot down there this morning. Had some incredible lights and wonderful cloud formations too. Thoroughly enjoyed that session. So, I guess we should talk about vignetting, because this lens does suffer from vignetting, especially when it's wide open at f2.8. I'll put these 4 images up on the screen now, just to give you an idea of the level of vignetting through the different aperture ranges from f2.8 to f11. I think the f2.8 might put astrophotographers off. potentially astrophotographers would want to shoot this lens probably wide open to gather as much light as possible. Vignetting may be an issue, especially if you may be doing panoramas. It might be quite tricky to stitch those images together. When I'm using a polarizer, the level of vignetting is pretty much the same. Once I add on a filter on top of that polarizer, I can then see some severe vignetting in the corners. So when I was using a 6-stop or a 3-stop filter, I ended up just cropping the images a little bit to get rid of those corners. Typically when I'm shooting seascapes, I'm using a 5:7 crop. So generally speaking, the very edges of the frame are cropped out anyway. So it's not such a big deal for me. If you want to use the full width of your image, you're going to have to correct that vignetting in Lightroom or Photoshop. Also, I should say, this lens performs particularly well when you shoot towards the sun. Flaring is minimal. It's pretty incredible, really. When you're shooting directly at the light, generally, you're getting ghosting, lens flare, that type of thing happening in your lens. This handles it particularly well, as you can see from those images that I took this morning and yesterday. That was really surprising, actually. And this also captures sun stars down to f2.8. So typically with a lens, if you want to shoot a sun star, you have to stop the aperture down to maybe f22 to be able to capture that sun star. You need a very, very small aperture. This lets you do it right down to f2.8, which is pretty incredible, I think. So if sun stars are your thing and you like shooting towards the light, I think you probably love this lens. So to conclude, having used this lens for the last couple of days shooting seascapes, I would recommend this lens to anyone that wants to shoot wide angle and into the sun. I think it does particularly well shooting towards the light. I think it handles flare particularly well, and the detail when you're shooting towards the sun is fantastic. It really is. It does suffer with vignetting though, and also some softness in the corners. So to get over this, I just crop in my image just ever so slightly either side. Usually I go for a 5:7 when I'm shooting seascapes, and that reduce those problems. If you like shooting sun stars, you're going to love this lens because you can shoot sun stars at all the apertures, which is pretty cool. Typically you would have to stop down your lens to f22 and then diffraction creeps into your image, making your image softer. But with this, you can shoot sun stars at f8 and get really nice image quality too. So I think anybody that's looking to shoot sun stars will love this lens. Build quality is fantastic, and the weather sealing definitely held up to everything that was thrown at this lens over the last couple of sessions. It's had a couple of waves over it and it got an absolute soaking from the driving wind and rain. So yeah, the weather sealing seems to hold up pretty well, and that's particularly pleasing. Stacking filters is a bit of an issue. Like I said before, polarizer on it is fine, but when I put a filter on top of the polarizer, I can see heavy vignetting in the very corners. So that's something to be mindful of if you're thinking about stacking filters. But all in all, I think this is a nice little wide angle lens that can certainly do a job, especially when you're shooting into the light. Anyway guys, I do hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider sharing it. Maybe others might like it too. Hit the thumbs up. Consider subscribing as well, because we're out every week shooting landscapes. So if that's your thing, please do consider subscribing. If you would like to support the channel, please do consider checking out the Photographers Clubhouse, where we learn, share and inspire one another to create amazing landscape photos. I do monthly videos on there, there's galleries, there's all of my educational videos on there as well. So there's heaps of content on there as well. If you fancy checking that out, link is in the description. Anyway guys, until next time, take care and I'll see you soon.